The crack echoed through Fort Bragg's training facility like a gunshot. Elena Rodriguez, all 5 feet 3 inches of her, stood perfectly still while Staff Sergeant Marcus Hendricks collapsed at her feet, screaming. His right arm bent at an angle that made hardened Special Forces operators turn away. 298 soldiers had just witnessed 7 seconds that would change military history. But this wasn't about a broken bone. This was about 3 weeks of harassment, a decade of prejudice, and one woman who refused to back down when a 240-pound ranger cornered her and said the words that sealed his fate. "You don't belong here, little girl." Fort Bragg, North Carolina, May 15th, 2019. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Elena's story reaches. Now, let me take you back to where it really started. Ina Rodriguez had been at Fort Bragg for exactly 4 days when she first heard Staff Sergeant Marcus Hendricks laugh at her credentials. She was standing in the administrative office of the Special Operations Training Center, finalizing her contractor paperwork, when his voice carried through the thin walls of the adjacent briefing room. "They hired a woman? To certify Rangers and SEALs in hand-to-hand combat? What's next? Hiring a kindergarten teacher to run sniper school?" The laughter that followed wasn't universal, but it was loud enough. Elena kept her eyes on the documents in front of her, her pen moving steadily across signature lines. She'd heard worse, much worse. But the administrative specialist sitting across from her, a young corporal named Chen, looked mortified. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, Don't apologize for someone else's ignorance, Corporal," Elena said quietly. "Just tell me where I sign next." Chen pointed to another line, but her discomfort was obvious. "For what it's worth, ma'am, I looked up your record. 2 combat deployments with Force Recon, Navy Commendation Medal with V device, MCMAP black belt instructor. The guys talking trash probably couldn't last 2 minutes in a ring with you." Elena smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Combat effectiveness isn't about lasting 2 minutes in a ring. It's about making the right decision in 2 seconds when someone's trying to kill you. That's what I'm here to teach." "Then they're lucky to have you." "We'll see if they agree." The door to the briefing room opened, and Marcus Hendricks walked out. 6'4", 240 pounds of muscle packed into an Army combat uniform that looked tailored specifically to intimidate. His Ranger tab and Special Forces tab sat above multiple deployment patches. 15 years in the Army had given him the kind of confidence that bordered on arrogance. He stopped when he saw Elena. His eyes traveled from her face down to her boots and back up again, the assessment deliberate and dismissive. "You must be the new contractor," he said. Not a question, not a greeting, just a statement loaded with skepticism. Elena stood, extending her hand. "Elena Rodriguez, I'm looking forward to working with Staff Sergeant Marcus Hendricks. And let me save us both some time." He didn't take her hand. "I don't know who you know or what boxes you checked to get this position, but certification in advanced close-quarters combat is serious business. The men in my unit have spent years earning their qualifications. They don't need someone playing dress-up as a combat instructor." The silence in the office was absolute. Corporal Chen looked like she wanted to disappear. Elena slowly lowered her hand, her expression unchanged. "Staff Sergeant, my qualifications are a matter of record. If you have concerns about my credentials, I'd be happy to discuss them with you and your commanding officer." Marcus laughed, the same laugh she'd heard through the wall. "Credentials on paper don't mean much when bullets start flying. But hey, I'm sure you'll do fine teaching the basics. Just stay out of the way when the real operators need advanced training." He walked past her without waiting for a response, the door closing behind him with deliberate force. Chen broke the silence first. "Ma'am, he's not the first, won't be the last," Elena said, sitting back down. Where's the next signature line? But her hand was trembling slightly as she picked up the pen. That night, Elena sat in her temporary quarters, staring at a photograph she kept in her wallet. Staff Sergeant David Chen, no relation to the corporal she'd met that morning. David had been her partner during her second deployment to Afghanistan. They'd served together in a force reconnaissance unit that operated in some of the worst terrain in Helmand Province. David was the one who'd convinced her to pursue MCMAP instructor certification. Rodriguez, you're half my size and twice as technical. You could teach these meatheads that fighting smart beats fighting hard every single time. She'd laughed at him then. These meatheads, as you call them, are Marines. Show some respect. I show respect to people who earn it. Size doesn't earn respect. Skill does. 3 months later, David was dead. Killed because their team leader, a man who'd repeatedly questioned whether Elena belonged on combat operations, made a tactical decision based on prejudice rather than intelligence. He'd dismissed Elena's assessment of an enemy position because he couldn't believe a little girl could read terrain better than his 15 years of experience. The ambush that followed killed David and wounded 2 others. The team leader faced no consequences. Tactical decision made in the heat of combat, the after-action report concluded. No evidence of negligence. Elena had left the Marines 6 months later. Not because she couldn't handle combat, because she couldn't handle a system that valued arrogance over competence. Now, staring at David's photograph, she made herself a promise. I'm going to prove them all wrong. Every single one of them. The rumors started spreading the next morning. Elena heard them in fragments as she walked through the training center, conversations that stopped when she approached, whispers that followed her down hallways, glances that ranged from curious to hostile. Diversity hire. Affirmative action contractor. Probably slept her way into the position. By lunchtime, the whispers had evolved into open speculation. Elena sat alone in the dining facility, eating a salad and reviewing the training curriculum she'd been hired to develop, when 3 soldiers sat down at the table next to hers. They weren't subtle about their conversation. I'm telling you, there's no way she's qualified, one of them said loudly. This is just the Army checking boxes. They need to show they're hiring women for combat roles, so they bring in some contractor with a padded resume. Hendricks said she's barely 5'3". How's she supposed to demonstrate combat techniques against guys who are 6 feet tall and 200 pounds? She's not, that's the point. This is all political theater. Elena kept her eyes on her curriculum documents, but her jaw was tight. She'd learned long ago that responding to this kind of talk only made it worse. The best response was to let her work speak for itself. But then one of the soldiers said something that made her pen stop moving. I heard she got someone killed in Afghanistan. That's why she's not in the Marines anymore. The lie hung in the air like poison gas. Elena stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. The 3 soldiers turned to look at her, their expressions ranging from surprised to smug. Say that again, she said quietly. The soldier who'd spoken, a specialist with a 10th Special Forces Group patch, had the decency to look uncomfortable. I didn't mean... Yes, you did. You said I got someone killed in Afghanistan. I want to know where you heard that. Look, I was just repeating rumors without knowing the facts, spreading lies about someone's service record because it's easier than actually looking at their credentials. Another soldier at the table stood up, older, with a ranger tab and the bearing of someone used to conflict. Ma'am, you're making a scene. No, Sergeant, they're making a scene by spreading false information about a contractor's background. My partner, Staff Sergeant David Chen, was killed in Helmand Province because our team leader made a tactical error. I tried to prevent that error. I failed. But I didn't get him killed, and I won't stand here and let you rewrite history because it fits your narrative. The dining facility had gone quiet. Dozens of soldiers were watching the confrontation unfold. The ranger sergeant's expression had shifted from defensive to calculating. David Chen, I knew him. Served with him in 2nd Battalion before he went force recon. Elena felt her throat tighten. Then you know he was a good Marine. The best. And he wouldn't want you defending his memory by picking fights in a chow hall. The sergeant turned to the specialist. Collins, apologize to the contractor for spreading unverified information. Sergeant, that wasn't a request, specialist. Collins mumbled an apology. Elena accepted it with a nod and walked out of the dining facility, her appetite gone, and her hands shaking with suppressed rage. She made it to the women's latrine before the tears came. Not tears of sadness. Tears of fury and frustration, and the weight of carrying David's memory while people who'd never met him used his death as ammunition against her. Colonel James Morrison called Elena to his office the following morning. Morrison was a career Army officer who'd spent 30 years in special operations. He'd commanded Ranger battalions, special forces groups, and joint task forces in 3 different war zones. His office walls were covered with plaques, photos, and memorabilia from a lifetime of service. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. Sit down, Ms. Rodriguez. We need to talk. Elena sat, her posture military straight despite her civilian clothes. Sir, if this is about the incident in the dining facility... It's about several incidents. The dining facility, the administrative office, the conversations that are happening throughout this training center. Morrison leaned back in his chair. You've been here less than a week, and you're already at the center of a controversy that's distracting from the mission. With respect, sir, I didn't create this controversy. I was hired to do a job, and I'm trying to do it while soldiers under your command spread lies about my service record and question my qualifications based on my gender. I know. Morrison's response surprised her. I've read your complete file, Ms. Rodriguez. Your classified file. The one that includes details about that operation in Helmand Province. The one that explains exactly what happened to Staff Sergeant Chen and why you left the Marine Corps. Elena felt her chest tighten. Then you know I didn't. I know you tried to prevent a disaster and were ignored. I know the after-action report was sanitized to protect a field-grade officer's career. I know you were offered a promotion and a new assignment if you'd keep quiet about what really happened. Morrison's expression hardened. And I know you turned down that promotion because you couldn't stomach serving in an organization that valued silence over accountability. The validation should have felt good. Instead, it just made Elena tired. Sir, why am I here? If you know all this, why did you hire me? Because you're one of the best hand-to-hand combat instructors in the country. Because your technical skills are exceptional. Because your military experience gives you credibility, and because I need someone who can train my soldiers to fight effectively, regardless of their size, gender, or physical advantages. Morrison stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the training fields. But I also need you to understand something. This isn't going to be easy. You're going to face resistance from soldiers who think women don't belong in combat roles. You're going to hear comments, face challenges, deal with prejudice that should have died out decades ago. I can handle it, sir. I know you can. The question is whether I can protect you while you do. He turned back to face her. Staff Sergeant Hendricks has requested that he be allowed to participate in your qualification demonstration next month. He says it's important for unit cohesion that senior NCOs validate new training programs. Elena understood immediately what that meant. He wants to publicly challenge my credentials in front of the entire training cadre. That's my assessment. I can deny his request. Don't. Morrison raised an eyebrow. Ms. Rodriguez. Sir, If you deny his request, it confirms everything he's been saying, that I need special protection, that I can't handle real challenges, that my qualifications are just paperwork." Elena stood up, meeting Morrison's gaze directly. "Let him participate. Let him test my techniques. Let him try to prove I don't belong here. Because when I demonstrate that skill beats size every single time, it won't just be my credibility on the line. It'll be every assumption he's made about women in combat." Morrison studied her for a long moment.
"You're asking me to let you put yourself in a potentially dangerous situation. Hendricks outweighs you by 100 pounds. He's a trained combatives instructor himself. If something goes wrong, then I'll deal with the consequences. But nothing will go wrong, sir. I know what I'm doing." That's what worries me. Because Marcus Hendricks thinks he knows what he's doing too. And when two people who are absolutely certain they're right collide, somebody usually gets hurt. Better that happens in a controlled demonstration than in a combat zone, sir. Morrison sighed. "I'll approve his participation. But Ms. Rodriguez, I want to be very clear about something. This demonstration is not about settling personal grudges. It's not about proving who's tougher. It's about demonstrating combat techniques that can save lives. If I see any indication that either you or Hendricks is treating this as a personal contest, I'll shut it down immediately. Understood?"
"Yes, sir."
"Good. Your demonstration is scheduled for 3 weeks from today. Use that time to prepare. And Ms. Rodriguez?" Morrison's expression softened slightly. "For what it's worth, David Chen wrote me a letter before he died. We'd served together in Iraq, stayed in touch afterward. He told me about a Marine in his unit who was the most technically proficient fighter he'd ever seen. Said she could teach guys twice her size to fight smarter instead of harder. Said if the Corps had any sense, they'd make her an instructor and let her revolutionize close-quarters combat training." Elena felt tears prickling her eyes. "He never told me he wrote that." "He wouldn't have. That's the kind of Marine he was. But I kept that letter, and when your resume came across my desk for this position, I remembered what he'd said. That's why you're here. Not because of diversity quotas or political correctness, because a Marine I trusted with my life told me you were the best. Don't make him a liar." The next 3 weeks were the most intense of Elena's civilian career. She trained every day, refining techniques that she'd practiced thousands of times before. But she wasn't just preparing her body, she was preparing her mind for what she knew was coming. Marcus Hendricks wasn't going to play by demonstration rules. He was going to test her, push her, try to expose what he believed were the fundamental limitations of her size and gender. And she was going to prove him wrong. Word about the upcoming demonstration spread through Fort Bragg like wildfire. What should have been a routine training exercise became the most anticipated event on the base calendar. Soldiers talked about it in the dining facilities, debated it during PT sessions, argued about it during off-duty hours. The betting started within the first week. Not officially, of course, but money quietly changed hands as soldiers wagered on whether Elena could maintain her composure when facing someone of Marcus Hendricks's size and skill. Elena heard the rumors, heard the bets, heard the crude speculation about what would happen when a little girl faced off against a real warrior. She used it all as fuel. 5 days before the demonstration, Marcus approached her during an equipment inspection. "Looking forward to next week," he said, his tone casual but his eyes intense. "I've been studying your background. Marine Corps MC MAP, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, all those technical disciplines that look great on paper. They work pretty well in practice too, Staff Sergeant. Against people who are cooperating. Against training partners who let you execute your techniques. But what about when someone doesn't play along? What about when they use their natural advantages? Elena looked up at him, her expression neutral. Natural advantages like size and strength? Exactly. Those aren't advantages, Staff Sergeant. They're crutches. They make you lazy. Make you think you can overpower everyone you face. And then one day you face someone who's faster, smarter, more technical. And your crutches break. Marcus's smile didn't waver, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. We'll see about that. He walked away, leaving Elena standing in the equipment bay with her heart pounding and her hands clenched into fists. The night before the demonstration, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in her quarters staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios in her mind. She knew the techniques she would demonstrate, knew the principles she would explain, knew the responses she would use for any attack Marcus might attempt. But she also knew the demonstrations could go wrong, had seen training exercises turn dangerous when ego and pride overrode common sense. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Tomorrow, everyone will see that you don't belong here. Enjoy your last day as a military contractor. Elena deleted the message without responding, but sleep became even more impossible. At 400, she gave up trying and went for a run. The pre-dawn darkness felt appropriate somehow. She ran through the empty streets of Fort Bragg, her feet pounding a rhythm that matched her racing thoughts. Skill beats size. Technique beats strength. Preparation beats prejudice. She repeated it like a mantra, mile after mile, until the sun started rising and her breathing found its natural rhythm. Back in her quarters, she showered and dressed carefully. Black tactical pants, black moisture-wicking shirt with her contractor ID. Her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Minimal jewelry. Maximum professionalism. Looking at herself in the mirror, she saw the Marine she used to be, the instructor she'd become, the woman who'd lost her partner to prejudice and incompetence. "This is for you, David," she whispered. "This is for everyone who's been told they're not good enough because of how they look, instead of what they can do." At 800, she walked into the Special Operations Training Center's main facility. 298 soldiers were already there, forming a massive circle around the central training mats, and standing in the middle of that circle, arms crossed and wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes, was Staff Sergeant Marcus Hendricks. The demonstration was about to begin. Colonel Morrison stood at the edge of the circle, his voice carrying across the packed facility with the authority of 3 decades in uniform. "Soldiers, we're here for a combat certification demonstration. You will observe, you will learn, and you will conduct yourselves with the professionalism expected of special operations personnel. This is not entertainment. This is training that could save your life or the life of the person next to you in combat. Am I understood?" "Yes, sir!" The response came from nearly 300 throats simultaneously, the sound echoing off the facility walls. Elena stepped onto the training mats, her movements controlled and deliberate. She could feel every eye in the room on her, could hear the whispered conversations that hadn't quite stopped despite Morrison's words. Her heart was pounding, but her breathing remained steady. She'd trained for this, prepared for this. This was just another demonstration. Except it wasn't. Not with Marcus Hendricks standing 10 feet away, his expression broadcasting exactly what he thought about her presence here. "Ms. Rodriguez will be demonstrating advanced defensive techniques," Morrison continued. "These techniques are designed to neutralize threats regardless of size differential, strength advantage, or aggressive intent. Pay attention to the principles, not just the movements. Understanding why something works is more important than memorizing how it looks." Elena picked up the wireless microphone that had been set up for her. "Good morning. Today we're going to focus on something most combat training ignores. What happens when your opponent is bigger, stronger,
and has every physical advantage over you." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through some of the soldiers. Elena ignored it.
Show of hands. How many of you have been taught that size and strength are the most important factors in hand-to-hand combat? Almost every hand went up. Now, keep your hands up if you've ever lost a fight to someone smaller than you. Most of the hands went down, but not all of them. Elena noticed about 30 soldiers whose hands stayed raised, including a few who looked embarrassed about admitting it. For those of you whose hands are still up, you learned something important that day. You learned that there's a difference between fighting hard and fighting smart. We're going to explore that difference today. Marcus spoke up from his position on the mats. "With all due respect, ma'am, most of us here have been in actual combat. We've fought enemies who wanted to kill us, not partners who are cooperating for a demonstration. How is this relevant to real-world situations?" The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. Several soldiers shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that Marcus was already pushing boundaries. Elena turned to face him directly. "That's an excellent question, Staff Sergeant, and you're absolutely right. Demonstration partners who follow scripted movements are very different from actual combat situations. That's why I'm going to ask for volunteers who won't be following any script, who will respond naturally, aggressively, the way they would in a real confrontation." "I volunteer." Marcus didn't hesitate. "I appreciate that, but let's start with someone else first. We'll work our way up to more challenging scenarios." It was a deliberate dismissal, and Marcus's jaw tightened. But he stepped back, waiting. A younger soldier, a corporal with 75th Ranger Regiment patches, stepped forward. "I'll volunteer, ma'am." "Name and unit?" "Corporal Stephen Walsh, ma'am, 2nd Battalion." Elena extended her hand. Walsh shook it, his grip firm but not aggressive. His eyes were curious rather than hostile, and Elena felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. "Corporal Walsh, I want you to grab my wrist as hard as you can. Don't hold back. Treat this like I'm an enemy combatant trying to reach for a weapon." Walsh hesitated. "Ma'am, I don't want to hurt." "You won't hurt me. Trust the training. Now grab my wrist." Walsh reached out and gripped Elena's right wrist with his left hand. His hand was easily twice the size of hers, his fingers wrapping completely around her forearm. "Tighter," Elena instructed. "I should see your knuckles turning white. You're trying to control me, remember?" Walsh's grip increased. Elena could feel the pressure, the strength in his hand that could easily overpower her if this were a simple test of force against force. "Watch what happens when I don't fight against his strength," Elena said to the watching soldiers. "Instead of pulling away, which is instinct but ineffective, I'm going to move toward the grip, rotating my arm in the direction of his thumb, which is the weakest point of any grip structure." She demonstrated the movement in slow motion first, explaining the mechanics. Then she had Walsh grab her again and executed the technique at full speed. His grip was broken in less than a second, and Elena had transitioned to a position where she controlled his arm at the elbow joint. The principle is simple. Never fight force with force when you're at a disadvantage. Redirect it. Use it against itself. The soldiers watching were paying attention now. Even some of the skeptical faces showed interest. Elena worked with Walsh through several more techniques, escapes from various grabs, defenses against common attacks, ways to create distance and control position despite being smaller. Walsh was a good training partner, attacking with realistic intent, but maintaining the safety protocols that kept demonstrations from becoming dangerous. After 15 minutes, Elena thanked Walsh and asked for another volunteer. This time, a Navy SEAL raised his hand, older, probably late 30s, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent years in combat zones. "Senior Chief Petty Officer Mike Chen, ma'am. SEAL Team 3. Elena's breath caught for just a moment. Chen. Different from David, but the name still hit like a punch to the chest.
She recovered quickly, hoping no one had noticed. "Senior Chief, thank you for volunteering. Let's demonstrate defense against a standing chokehold." They worked through several scenarios, each one building in complexity and intensity. Senior Chief Chen was more aggressive than Walsh had been, testing Elena's techniques with the kind of pressure that came from actual combat experience. But the techniques held up.
Every time Chen tried to use his size and strength advantages, Elena's technical precision and understanding of leverage neutralized them. 30 minutes into the demonstration, the energy in the room had shifted. The initial skepticism was giving way to grudging respect from many of the soldiers. They were seeing principles in action that challenged their assumptions about combat effectiveness. But Marcus Hendricks was not one of them. He'd been standing at the edge of the training mats, his arms crossed, his expression growing darker with each successful technique Elena demonstrated. Every time she escaped a larger opponent's control, every time she turned someone's strength against them, it seemed to wound something fundamental in his worldview. He started making comments, quiet at first, directed at the soldiers standing near him. "This only works because they're cooperating. Real attackers don't move in slow motion. She's choosing volunteers who aren't really trying. Watch, she avoids anyone who looks too aggressive. In a real fight, none of this fancy technical stuff matters. Speed, power, aggression, that's what wins fights." The comments grew louder, more pointed, designed to be heard not just by the soldiers next to him, but by Elena herself. Elena continued the demonstration, maintaining her professional composure. She'd dealt with this before, men who couldn't accept that their assumptions about physical dominance were wrong, who needed to believe that size mattered more than skill because their entire identity was built on being bigger and stronger. But Morrison wasn't tolerating it. He stepped closer to Marcus, his voice low but carrying enough authority that nearby soldiers fell silent. "Staff Sergeant Hendricks, your commentary is disruptive and inappropriate. One more word, and you'll be removed from this training." Marcus's face flushed, but he didn't respond, just nodded curtly and went silent. For about 5 minutes, then he started again, slightly quieter but still audible. "Bet she couldn't handle someone who actually wanted to hurt her. All this is just choreographed demonstration bullshit." Elena stopped mid-explanation. The soldier she'd been working with, a young ranger lieutenant, stepped back, sensing the shift in atmosphere. She turned to face Marcus directly. "Staff Sergeant Hendricks, you've been volunteering for the last hour through your commentary. Would you like to actually step onto the mats and test these techniques yourself?" The facility went absolutely silent. Every soldier present understood what had just happened. This was no longer just a training demonstration. This was a challenge being issued and accepted in front of nearly 300 witnesses. Marcus smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. "I thought you'd never ask, ma'am." He stepped onto the training mats with the confidence of someone who'd won hundreds of confrontations through sheer physical intimidation. At 6'4" and 240 pounds, he made Elena look like a child by comparison. The size differential was striking enough that several soldiers actually pulled out their phones, regulations be damned. Morrison stepped forward. "This will be a controlled demonstration. Standard training protocols apply. We're here to learn, not to settle personal—" "Colonel, with respect, if we're going to demonstrate these techniques effectively, we need realistic scenarios." Marcus's voice was respectful toward Morrison, but his eyes never left Elena. "The contractor said herself that cooperation doesn't reflect real combat. I'm just offering to provide a more authentic training experience." It was brilliantly manipulative. He'd positioned himself as the professional trying to enhance training value, making it difficult for Morrison to shut him down without appearing to favor Elena. Morrison looked at Elena. "Ms. Rodriguez, you don't have to—" "It's fine, sir. Let's give these soldiers the realistic demonstration the staff sergeant is requesting." Elena's voice was calm, but her hands had unconsciously formed loose fists at her sides. She forced herself to relax them, to let her breathing settle into the rhythm she'd practiced thousands of times. Marcus cracked his knuckles, rolled his shoulders, every movement designed to emphasize his physical advantages. "What scenario did you want to demonstrate, ma'am?" "Defense against an aggressive grab. You'll attempt to control my upper body. I'll demonstrate the appropriate response." "Sounds good. Should I go easy on you?" The condescension in his voice made several soldiers wince. "Don't do me any favors, Staff Sergeant. Attack the way you would in actual combat." They faced each other on the mats. The circle of watching soldiers pressed closer, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Marcus moved first. His hands shot out toward Elena's shoulders, intending to grab and control her upper body. But his movement was faster than it should have been for a controlled demonstration, more aggressive than was appropriate for training. Elena's response was immediate and technical. She moved offline from his grab, redirecting his hands while simultaneously stepping in to compromise his balance. Her movement was so precise, so economical, that Marcus found himself stumbling forward, off balance and vulnerable. But he recovered quickly, his size and strength allowing him to reset faster than a smaller opponent could have managed. "Good," he said, breathing slightly harder. "But you got lucky. Let's try that again." "That wasn't luck, Staff Sergeant. That was technique." They engaged again. This time Marcus was more cautious, more controlled, but Elena's technical superiority was becoming obvious to everyone watching. Every time he tried to use his strength advantage, she redirected it. Every time he pressed forward aggressively, she moved at angles that neutralized his power. The watching soldiers were mesmerized. Many of them had never seen this level of technical precision applied against someone with Marcus's size and skill level. But Marcus was getting frustrated. His face was flushed, his breathing harder than it should have been for the level of exertion, and his movements were becoming less controlled, more genuinely aggressive. "You keep running away," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "In a real fight, you can't just dance around. Eventually, someone corners you. Then what?" Elena's eyes narrowed. "Then I demonstrate that being cornered doesn't mean being helpless. But, Staff Sergeant, I think we've demonstrated enough for—" "One more scenario. You said you wanted realistic training." Marcus's voice had taken on an edge that several soldiers recognized as dangerous. "Let me show these men what happens when technical skill meets real-world aggression." Morrison stepped forward. "Staff Sergeant, that's enough. You've made your—" "Sir, the contractor challenged me to test her techniques. I'm just following through on her offer." It was a trap, and they all knew it. If Morrison stopped it now, Marcus could claim Elena couldn't handle real pressure. If he let it continue, things might escalate beyond acceptable training boundaries. Elena made the decision for him. "One more scenario, then we move on to the next section of the demonstration." She could see something in Marcus's eyes that made her instincts scream warning. This wasn't about training anymore. This was personal. This was about his need to prove that everything he believed about combat, about women, about physical dominance, that all of it was right and she was wrong. They reset their positions. The crowd pressed even closer. Someone had definitely started recording, despite regulations. This moment was going to be documented, one way or another. Marcus moved with sudden, explosive speed, closing the distance between them faster than Elena had anticipated. His hands went not for a controlled grab, but for her throat, a move that crossed every line of appropriate training conduct. Elena's training took over completely. Her body moved before her conscious mind could process the threat, executing a defense she'd practiced 10,000 times against exactly this type of attack. She trapped Marcus's extended arms, stepped in close to his center line,
and executed a technique that used his forward momentum and committed position against him. Her hip became a fulcrum, his body weight became the lever, and physics did the rest. Marcus Hendricks went airborne. He crashed to the training mat hard enough that several soldiers gasped. The impact drove the air from his lungs with an audible whoosh.
Ina had released him the moment the technique was complete, stepping back into a balanced defensive position. Professional. Controlled. Exactly what she'd been trained to do. But Marcus wasn't done. He rolled to his feet, his face dark with humiliation and rage. Every eye in the facility was on him. 298 soldiers had just watched him get thrown by someone half his size, and he couldn't handle it.
"Lucky shot," he gasped, still catching his breath. You caught me off guard." "Staff Sergeant, the demonstration is over." Morrison's voice carried command authority that could freeze soldiers in their tracks. "Return to your position in the—" "No, sir. With respect. I need to see if that was actually skill, or just fortunate timing." Marcus was already moving back toward Elena, his body language radiating aggression that had nothing to do with training. "One more time." "Staff Sergeant, stand down. That is a direct—" But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. He was moving toward Elena with clear intent, his hands coming up not in a training posture, but in genuine attack position. Elena saw it happening, saw the exact moment when Marcus Hendricks stopped being a soldier following training protocols and became something else, something dangerous. She tried to create distance, tried to de-escalate. "Staff Sergeant, we're done here. Step back and you need to learn your place." His voice was loud enough that every soldier heard it. Little girls playing warrior don't belong in special operations. Time someone taught you that lesson. He lunged forward with speed that belied his size, his right hand coming toward her face in what was unmistakably an attack, not a demonstration technique. And in that split second, Elena Rodriguez made a decision that would change everything. Her body moved on pure instinct, the kind of response that comes from 10,000 hours of training compressed into a fraction of a second. Elena saw Marcus's hand coming toward her face, saw the genuine intent to harm in his eyes, and every defense mechanism in her brain activated simultaneously. She caught his wrist mid-strike, her grip locking on with precision that came from muscle memory older than conscious thought. Her left hand secured his elbow joint, while her right controlled his wrist, creating what combat instructors called a mechanical advantage chain. 2 points of control that turned an opponent's limb into a lever against itself. Marcus tried to pull back, finally realizing he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. But Elena's positioning was already perfect. Her body weight shifted, her stance set. She wasn't thinking anymore. She was executing. The technique unfolded in what felt like slow motion to Elena, but happened in real time in less than 3 seconds. She stepped through, rotating her hips while maintaining rigid control of Marcus's arm. His elbow hyperextended as she applied pressure in the exact opposite direction the joint was designed to move. That's when she felt it. The moment of resistance before structural failure. The point where ligaments and tendons reached their absolute limit. She should have stopped, should have released pressure, should have recognized that the technique had achieved its objective of control and neutralization. But Marcus was still pushing forward, still trying to power through, still refusing to submit to the reality that his size meant nothing against properly applied biomechanics. His free hand came up, reaching for her throat, and Elena's training made the decision her conscious mind couldn't. She applied the final degree of pressure. The sound that filled the training facility was unlike anything most of the soldiers had ever heard outside of combat zones. It wasn't a single crack, it was a series of them, sharp, distinct, the sound of bones breaking in multiple places simultaneously. Marcus's scream came half a second later, high-pitched and raw, with a pain so intense it bypassed every filter of military stoicism and masculine pride. He collapsed to the training mat, his right arm hanging at an angle that made several soldiers turn away. Elena released immediately, stepping back with her hands raised, her chest heaving with adrenaline, and her mind trying to process what had just happened. The technique had worked exactly as designed. Too exactly. The injury was catastrophic. "Medic!" Colonel Morrison's voice cut through the shocked silence like a blade. "Someone get a medic in here, now!" The circle of soldiers broke apart, some rushing toward Marcus, others backing away in horror. Many just standing frozen as their brains struggled to reconcile what they'd witnessed.
Marcus was still screaming, cradling his destroyed arm against his chest, his face sheet white and covered in sweat. Elena stood exactly where the technique had ended, her body still in defensive position, but her hands had started shaking. She could feel 300 pairs of eyes on her, some horrified, some impressed, some calculating what this meant for their own beliefs about combat and capability. "Don't touch him!" A voice from the crowd, the SEAL senior chief who'd volunteered earlier. He was kneeling next to Marcus, his combat medical training taking over. "His arm's broken in multiple places. Moving him wrong could cause permanent nerve damage." Morrison was already on his radio. "This is Colonel Morrison. We have a medical emergency at the main training facility. Combat injury, compound fractures, need immediate transport to base hospital." The facility doors burst open, and 3 combat medics rushed in, carrying their trauma bags. They took one look at Marcus, and their professional calm cracked slightly. "Jesus Christ," one of them muttered. "What happened?" "Training accident," Morrison said, his voice tight. "Assess and stabilize. I want him transported in less than 5 minutes." The medics went to work with practiced efficiency. They didn't try to straighten Marcus's arm, couldn't given the severity of the fractures. Instead, they immobilized it in its current position, packed the area with padding, and administered morphine that barely seemed to touch the pain. "Sir, we need to move him now," the lead medic said. "This isn't just fractures. I can see bone through the skin. He needs surgery within the hour or he's looking at permanent disability." "Then move. Go!" They loaded Marcus onto a stretcher, his screams having finally subsided into whimpers as the morphine started taking effect. As they carried him toward the exit, his eyes found Elena's. The expression in them wasn't anger anymore. It was fear. Raw, genuine fear of what his future looked like with an arm destroyed that completely. The facility doors closed behind the medical team, and the silence that followed was suffocating. Elena finally lowered her hands, but they were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. She'd trained for this, prepared for this. But nothing could prepare you for the reality of seriously injuring another person, even in self-defense, even when they'd given you no choice. "Ms. Rodriguez," Morrison's voice was carefully neutral. "You need to come with me, now." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. As she walked toward Morrison, the circle of soldiers parted, creating a path. Some of their faces showed respect, others showed something closer to fear. A few looked at her like she was a weapon that had just proven more dangerous than they'd imagined. She heard fragments of conversation as she passed. "Did you see that? Broke it in 3 places from what I could tell." He was attacking her. She defended herself. Defended herself? She destroyed his arm. Somebody filmed it. This is going to be everywhere in an hour. Morrison led her to a small office adjacent to the training facility. 2 military police officers were already waiting there, their expressions professionally blank, but their body language suggesting they'd heard what happened. "Sit down," Morrison said quietly. Elena sat. Her legs felt weak,
her hands still trembling. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving behind something that felt like shock. What happened in there? Morrison's question was direct, but not accusatory. He attacked me, sir. Not a demonstration technique. An actual attack with intent to harm. I saw it. So did 300 other witnesses. But I need to hear it from you, in your own words, exactly what you perceived and how you responded. Elena took a breath, forcing her mind to organize events into coherent narrative. Staff Sergeant Hendricks had been escalating throughout the demonstration. His commentary became increasingly hostile and personal. When I offered him the opportunity to participate directly, he accepted, but his approach was aggressive beyond training parameters. Agreed. Continue. We engaged in several controlled exchanges. Each time, I demonstrated defensive techniques that neutralized his size advantage. He became visibly frustrated. When you ordered him to stand down, he refused. He came at me a final time and said, her voice caught slightly. He said I needed to learn my place. That little girls playing warrior don't belong in special operations. One of the MPs was taking notes. Morrison's face was carved from granite. His movement wasn't a training technique. It was a genuine assault. He went for my throat, sir. I responded with the appropriate defensive technique for that specific attack. The technique that broke his arm in multiple places. Yes, sir. The standing armbar is designed to control and neutralize an opponent using leverage against the elbow joint. When applied with full resistance from an opponent who's actively attacking, Elena's voice failed completely. Morrison leaned forward. Did you intend to break his arm? The question hung in the air like a live grenade. I intended to stop the attack, sir. The severity of the injury... Elena had to pause, had to swallow against the tightness in her throat. That was the result of him continuing to push forward against a technique specifically designed to stop that forward pressure. If he'd submitted, if he'd recognized when he was caught, the injury wouldn't have been so severe. But he didn't submit. No, sir. He kept trying to power through. Even after the joint was compromised, he was still reaching for me with his other hand. The final break happened when he refused to acknowledge he was caught. The MP who'd been taking notes looked up. Ma'am, are you saying the injury was partly self-inflicted? Elena met his eyes directly. I'm saying I applied a legal defensive technique against an unprovoked assault. The technique worked exactly as it was designed to work. The severity of the injury reflects how much force Staff Sergeant Hendricks was applying when the technique caught him. Morrison stood and walked to the small window. There were at least a dozen phones recording that incident. By now, the video is probably on social media. By tonight, it'll be on national news. Female civilian contractor breaks Army Ranger's arm during training demonstration. You understand how this is going to look? Yes, sir. You understand that regardless of whether you were defending yourself, you just seriously injured a decorated soldier in front of 300 witnesses. Yes, sir. And you understand that your career as a military contractor is probably over as of right now, regardless of what the investigation determines. Elena felt something break inside her chest. After everything she'd survived, everything she'd overcome, it was ending like this. Defending herself against a man who'd attacked her and paying the price for it anyway. I understand, sir. Morrison turned back to face her. You also need to understand that I watched the entire incident. I saw Hendricks escalate. I saw him disobey direct orders. I saw him assault you. And I saw you respond with a textbook defensive technique that probably saved you from serious injury. Elena's head snapped up, hope flickering in her chest. That doesn't mean this won't be complicated. That doesn't mean you won't face questions and scrutiny and people who'll crucify you regardless of the facts. But it means you'll have the truth on your side. And in my experience, The truth matters.
Not always immediately, not always obviously, but eventually. One of the MPs cleared his throat. "Sir, we need to get her statement on record, and we need to secure any video footage before it gets deleted or edited." "Do it. Ms. Rodriguez, you'll be cooperating fully with the investigation. You're not under arrest, but you're not to leave base without permission. Understood?"
Yes, sir.
Morrison headed for the door, then paused.
For what it's worth, you did everything right. You maintained professionalism under extreme provocation. You used appropriate force for self-defense. And you proved every point you were trying to make about technical skill versus physical dominance. But sometimes doing everything right still costs you everything. He left. The MPs began their formal interview, asking questions that Elena answered mechanically, her mind only half present as she relived those 7 seconds over and over again.
2 hours later, she was finally allowed to return to her quarters. The walk across base was surreal. Soldiers who'd never looked at her twice were now staring openly, some with respect, some with fear, some with undisguised hostility. Her phone was already flooded with messages, unknown numbers, media requests, threats that made her hands shake all over again.
You think breaking a man's arm makes you tough? Wait until real men come for you.
Feminist bitch got what she wanted. Hope you're proud.
You're a hero. Don't let them tear you down for defending yourself.
The messages were split almost evenly between support and condemnation, and Elena couldn't process any of it. She turned off her phone and sat on her bunk, staring at the wall. That's when the tears finally came. Not tears of regret. She'd done what she had to do. Not tears of fear. She'd faced worse than an investigation. These were tears of exhaustion, of carrying the weight of fighting battles she shouldn't have to fight, of being punished for competence because it challenged men like Marcus Hendricks, who couldn't accept that their assumptions were wrong. She cried for David Chen, who'd died because prejudice mattered more than intelligence. She cried for every woman who'd been told she didn't belong somewhere because of her size or gender. She cried for Marcus Hendricks, too, whose career was over because his ego couldn't handle being wrong. And when the tears finally stopped, Elena Rodriguez pulled out her phone, turned it back on, and started documenting everything. Every threat, every message, every detail of what had happened and why. Because Morrison was right. The truth mattered. And she was going to make damn sure the truth was what people heard, not the twisted version that would inevitably emerge. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Ms. Rodriguez? This is Captain Sarah Chen, JAG Corps. I've been assigned to your case." Elena's breath caught.
Chen?
"Yes, ma'am. Any relation to Staff Sergeant David Chen, USMC, if you don't mind me asking?"
He was my partner. In Afghanistan.
There was a long pause on the line.
He was my brother. And, Ms. Rodriguez, I read the classified after-action report about how he died. About what really happened. About who tried to stop it.
Elena couldn't speak.
"I'm going to make sure you get through this," Captain Chen said quietly. "I'm going to make sure the truth comes out, not just about today, about everything. My brother believed you were the best. Time to prove him right."
The call ended, and Elena sat in the silence of her quarters, holding a phone that connected her past to her present in ways she couldn't have predicted. Outside her window, the sun was setting on Fort Bragg. Somewhere in the base hospital, Marcus Hendricks was in surgery, his career ending on an operating table. Somewhere in Washington, military officials were already preparing statements. Somewhere on social media, the video of those 7 seconds was spreading like wildfire. But in this moment, in this quiet room, Elena Rodriguez was making a decision. She wasn't going to run, wasn't going to hide, wasn't going to apologize for defending herself or proving that skill mattered more than size. She was going to fight, just like she'd taught 300 soldiers how to do. And she was going to win. The investigation began the next morning at 0600 hours, before most of Fort Bragg had finished their first cup of coffee. Elena sat across from a panel of 5 officers, 2 from JAG, 1 from CID, Colonel Morrison, and a major general she'd never met who'd apparently flown in from Washington overnight. Captain Sarah Chen sat beside her, a stack of documents already prepared. Her resemblance to David was striking. Same dark eyes, same focused intensity, same quiet confidence that came from knowing you were good at your job. "Ms. Rodriguez," the Major General began, "I'm General Patricia Whitmore. I oversee special operations training protocols for the entire Army. What happened yesterday in that training facility has already made national news. CNN is running the story on loop. Fox News has 3 different pundits debating whether you should be prosecuted. Twitter is calling you everything from a hero to a criminal. So, let's cut through the noise and deal with facts. Tell me exactly what happened." Elena had rehearsed this a dozen times in her head during the sleepless night. But sitting here, facing a general officer who could end her career with a single decision, the words felt inadequate. "General, Staff Sergeant Hendricks had been making increasingly hostile comments throughout my demonstration." When I offered him the opportunity to participate directly, he accepted, but his intent was to discredit me, not to learn. "His intent doesn't matter legally," one of the JAG officers interrupted. "What matters is whether your response was proportional to the threat." "Captain Lewis, let her finish," General Whitmore said sharply. "Continue, Ms. Rodriguez." "We engaged in several controlled exchanges. Each time, I demonstrated defensive techniques within appropriate training parameters. But Staff Sergeant Hendricks became visibly frustrated. When Colonel Morrison ordered him to stand down, he refused. He approached me a final time with clear intent to cause harm, not demonstrate technique. He grabbed for my throat. I responded with a standing armbar, a legal defensive technique taught in every military combatives program. "A technique that broke his arm in 3 places," Captain Lewis said. "A technique designed to neutralize an armed or aggressive opponent using mechanical advantage," Captain Chen countered. "The severity of the injury indicates the amount of force Staff Sergeant Hendricks was applying when the technique caught him. If he'd submitted or ceased resistance, the injury would have been minimal." The CID officer spoke up for the first time. "We've interviewed 47 witnesses so far. Every single one confirms that Hendricks was the aggressor. Every single one confirms that Ms. Rodriguez maintained professional conduct until the final exchange. And every single one confirms that Hendricks disobeyed a direct order from his commanding officer to stand down." Elena felt something loosen in her chest. 47 witnesses, all telling the truth. "We've also reviewed video footage from 17 different phones," the CID officer continued. "Despite regulations prohibiting recording during training exercises, at least 20 soldiers filmed the incident. The footage is consistent across all sources. Hendricks grabbed for Ms. Rodriguez's throat. She defended herself. The technique was textbook. The injury was a result of Hendricks refusing to submit." General Whitmore leaned back in her chair. "Show me the clearest footage." Captain Chen pulled out a laptop and turned it so everyone could see. The video started 30 seconds before the final confrontation, capturing Marcus's comment about Elena needing to learn her place, Morrison's order to stand down, Marcus's refusal, and then the 7 seconds that had changed everything. Elena forced herself to watch, to see it from an outside perspective rather than from inside the moment. Marcus lunging forward, genuine aggression in every line of his body. Her defensive movement, precise and controlled, the technique unfolding exactly as designed. Marcus's refusal to submit, even as the joint began to fail, and then the break, visible in the way his arm suddenly lost all structural integrity. The room was silent as the video ended. "He had multiple opportunities to stop," General Whitmore said quietly. "After the technique was locked in, he had at least 2 seconds where submission would have prevented serious injury. But he kept pushing forward, kept trying to reach her with his other hand. This isn't a case of excessive force. This is a case of necessary force meeting stubborn stupidity." Captain Lewis looked uncomfortable. "General, with respect, the optics of this—" "I don't give a damn about optics, Captain. I care about facts. And the facts are clear. A female contractor was assaulted by a male soldier who disobeyed direct orders. She defended herself using appropriate techniques. The injury was severe because the attacker refused to acknowledge when he was beaten." Whitmore turned to Elena. "Ms. Rodriguez, I've also read your classified file. The real one, not the sanitized version. I know what happened in Helmand Province. I know why you left the Marines. And I know that what you tried to prevent then is exactly what happened here. A man letting his prejudice override his judgment and paying the price for it." Elena couldn't speak, couldn't process that a general officer was saying these things out loud. "Here's what's going to happen," Whitmore continued. "This investigation will conclude that you acted in lawful self-defense. No charges will be filed. Your contractor status will be reviewed, but not because of this incident, because we need to determine the best way to utilize your skills moving forward." "General," Elena managed to say, "my contract is being terminated, effective immediately." The words hit like a physical blow. Elena had expected it, had prepared for it, but hearing it spoken made it real in a way that preparation couldn't soften. "However," Whitmore said, and Elena's head snapped up, "you're being offered a different position. We're creating a new training program, Integrated Combat Systems. It will standardize hand-to-hand combat training across all special operations units, with emphasis on technical proficiency rather than physical attributes. The program needs a director, someone with combat experience, teaching credentials, and the courage to challenge conventional thinking about what makes an effective warrior." Elena's mind was racing. "You want me to lead the most significant reform of military combat training in 30 years? Yes. The position is civilian, GS-14 equivalent, with potential advancement to GS-15. You'll have authority to develop curriculum, select instructors, and implement standards across Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps Special Operations units. You'll report directly to my office, and, Ms. Rodriguez, you'll have the institutional backing to make sure what happened to David Chen and what almost happened to you never happens to another service member." Captain Chen was smiling. Colonel Morrison looked satisfied. Even the CID officer seemed pleased. But Elena was struggling to process the magnitude of what was being offered. "General, I broke a man's arm. On camera. In front of 300 soldiers. How am I supposed to have credibility after—" "You defended yourself against an assault. The video proves it. The witnesses confirm it. And frankly, every soldier who watched that video learned more about the effectiveness of proper technique in 7 seconds than they would have learned in a month of conventional training." Whitmore stood up. "I'm giving you 72 hours to decide. But Ms. Rodriguez, the Army needs people like you. People who refuse to accept that the way things have always been done is the way they should continue to be done. Don't let Marcus Hendrix's prejudice cost the military the chance to evolve." The meeting ended. Elena walked out in a daze, Captain Chen beside her. "You're going to accept, right?" Chen asked. "Sarah, can I call you Sarah? Please do. Your partner was my brother. That makes us family of a sort." Elena felt tears threatening again. "David never told me he had a sister. Never told me you were Jag."
He kept his personal life separate from his professional life, but he talked about you constantly in his letters home, said you were the best Marine he'd ever served with, said you saw things other people missed, understood tactics at a level that should have put you in command positions. Sarah paused. He also said the Corps would never give you those positions because too many people couldn't see past your size and gender to recognize your capability. He was right. He usually was. But Elena, this is your chance to prove him right about something else, too.
He believed you could revolutionize combat training. Here's your opportunity. They walked in silence for a moment before Elena spoke again.
How bad is it? The media coverage?
Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Elena the headlines. Female contractor breaks Ranger's arm in training incident. Fort Bragg investigating after violent training demonstration. Video shows woman seriously injuring male soldier. Was it self-defense or excessive force? Combat instructor or dangerous liability? Debate rages over training incident. Elena scrolled through them, her stomach churning. The comments sections were worse. Hundreds of people who hadn't been there, hadn't seen what happened, making judgments based on their own biases and assumptions. Don't read the comments, Sarah advised. Never read the comments. The people who matter, the ones who were there, the ones who saw what happened, they know the truth. Everyone else is just noise. But the noise was deafening. By midday, Elena's phone had received over 300 messages. Death threats mixed with marriage proposals, mixed with interview requests, mixed with expressions of support. She turned off her phone again. The call came to Sarah's phone instead. She answered, listened for a moment, then held it out to Elena.
It's Marcus Hendricks. He wants to talk to you.
Elena stared at the phone like it might explode.
Why would he? Only one way to find out.
Elena took the phone with shaking hands.
This is Elena Rodriguez?
Marcus's voice was thick with pain medication, but coherent. They told me I might never regain full use of my right arm. 3 surgeries scheduled. Months of rehabilitation. Medical discharge probable. Elena didn't know what to say.
I'm sorry that...
Don't apologize. I'm calling because my lawyer says I should sue you. My family says I should file assault charges. My friends from Ranger Battalion say I should make your life hell. He paused, and Elena could hear the ragged breathing of someone in serious pain. But I watched the video. Watched it about 20 times now. And you know what I saw?
What?
I saw everything you tried to teach us. Every principle you explained. Every technique you demonstrated. You moved offline, controlled the attacking limb, used leverage instead of strength, applied pressure to the joint in the direction it couldn't move. It was textbook. Perfect execution. His voice cracked. And I saw myself. Saw the moment I stopped being a professional soldier and became something I'm ashamed of. Saw myself attack you. Saw myself disobey direct orders. Saw myself prove every point you were trying to make about ego and prejudice getting in the way of effectiveness. Elena sat down hard on a nearby bench.
Marcus,
Staff Sergeant Hendricks, ma'am. Let's keep it professional. I'm calling to tell you I won't be filing charges. Won't be cooperating with any media hit pieces. Won't be doing anything except accepting the consequences of my actions. He took a shaky breath. And I'm calling to say you were right. About everything. Size doesn't matter. Strength doesn't matter. Technical skill and proper training. That's what matters. I just wish I'd learned that lesson before I destroyed my career
and my arm. "What are you going to do?" "Medical discharge, disability benefits. Probably spend the rest of my life regretting that I let my pride override my judgment." Another pause. "But, Ms. Rodriguez, if you get the chance to keep teaching, if you get the chance to train other soldiers, take it. Because you're good at it. And the military needs people who are good at things, regardless of what they look like." The call ended. Elena sat holding Sarah's phone, trying to process the conversation. "He apologized," she said numbly. "People sometimes do, when reality hits them hard enough," Sarah replied. "Doesn't undo the damage, but it's something."
The next 48 hours were a blur of interviews, statements, and legal reviews. The investigation board reviewed every frame of video, every witness statement, every detail of the incident. Their conclusion was unanimous. Elena had acted in lawful self-defense against an unprovoked assault. But the media circus continued. Elena did one interview with a military correspondent who'd actually served, who understood the context and the stakes. That interview went viral for different reasons than the initial video. "So you broke his arm," the correspondent said. "I defended myself using a technique I've practiced thousands of times. The severity of the injury reflected how much force he was applying." "And if you had it to do over again?" Elena thought about that, about the 7 seconds that had changed everything, about Marcus's destroyed career and her own uncertain future, about David Chen, who'd died because someone's prejudice mattered more than his intelligence. "I'd do exactly the same thing," she said, "because the alternative was letting him hurt me, was reinforcing the idea that women don't belong in combat roles, that size matters more than skill, that people like me should just accept disrespect and aggression because fighting back makes us the problem." She looked directly at the camera. "I refuse to accept that. I refused to accept it as a Marine, and I refuse to accept it now." The interview clip played on every major news network. Opinion pieces were written. Debates raged on social media. But slowly, gradually, the narrative began to shift. People who'd actually served in combat, who understood the stakes and the training, started speaking up. Female veterans shared their own stories of harassment and having to prove themselves over and over. Male soldiers admitted they'd learned something from watching that video. On the third day, Elena received a call from General Whitmore's office. "Ms. Rodriguez, have you made your decision about the position?" Elena thought about David Chen, about Marcus Hendricks, about the 300 soldiers who'd witnessed 7 seconds that challenged everything they thought they knew about combat effectiveness. "Yes, General, I accept." "Outstanding. Report to my office Monday morning at 0800. We have a training program to build and a military culture to change. Think you're up for it?" Elena smiled for the first time in 3 days. "Yes, General. I think I am." 6 months later, Elena stood in front of her first graduating class of the Integrated Combat Systems program. 48 instructors, 23 men, 25 women, from every branch of the military. Navy SEALs sat next to Army Rangers. Marine Force recon operators worked alongside Air Force pararescue jumpers. And every single one of them had just spent 12 weeks learning that everything they thought they knew about combat effectiveness was incomplete. "You came here skeptical," Elena said, walking down the center aisle of the classroom. "Some of you thought this was political correctness run amok. Some of you thought I was the woman who broke a ranger's arm and somehow convinced the brass to give me a job instead of a court-martial. Some of you were here because your command made you be here, not because you wanted to learn anything." A few uncomfortable laughs, but mostly attention. She had their attention now. In 12 weeks, what changed? Not me. Not the techniques.
What changed was your understanding of what makes someone effective in combat. Chief Petty Officer Morrison, she pointed to a SEAL in the third row. You came in weighing 220 pounds and benching 350. You left here the same size and strength, but you also left here having been submitted 17 times by people half your weight. What did you learn?
Morrison stood up. Ma'am, I learned that I've been relying on physical advantages so much that my technical skills had atrophied. I learned that against a trained opponent who understands leverage and timing, my strength was actually making me predictable. And I learned that I need to completely rebuild how I teach combat techniques to my team. Sergeant First Class Williams, same question. Williams, a ranger instructor with 20 years in service, stood slowly. I learned that I've been teaching people to fight the wrong way for 2 decades. I've been emphasizing strength and aggression when I should have been emphasizing technique and control. And, ma'am, I learned that the instructor who broke Staff Sergeant Hendrix's arm did it because she was better trained, not because she was vicious or out of control. The silence in the room was profound. Elena felt something unlock in her chest that had been tight since that day in the training facility. You're all going back to your units as certified instructors in this program. You're going to face resistance. You're going to hear the same arguments you made when you first arrived here. Size matters. Strength matters. Women can't compete with men in physical combat. You know what you're going to do? Prove them wrong, ma'am, someone called out. No, you're going to teach them. Because this isn't about proving anything. This is about saving lives. When a 140-pound soldier can effectively defend themselves against a 240-pound opponent, that's not political correctness. That's a force multiplier. That's the difference between coming home alive and not coming home at all. She dismissed the class. They filed out, but several stayed behind to shake her hand, to thank her, to tell her this had changed how they thought about everything. Captain Sarah Chen was waiting outside the classroom. General Whitmore wants to see you. And, Elena, she has someone with her. Elena's stomach dropped. Media? Because I'm not doing any more not media, just come on. They walked across the training complex that had become Elena's entire world for the past 6 months. The Rodriguez Combat Excellence Center, they'd renamed it after the video of the incident had been viewed over 50 million times, after the investigation had cleared her, after she'd become the unexpected face of a movement she'd never asked to lead. General Whitmore's temporary office was in the administration building. Elena knocked and entered. Marcus Hendrix sat in a chair across from Whitmore's desk. Elena stopped cold. She hadn't seen Marcus since the day of the incident. Had heard he'd been medically discharged, was living with family in Texas, was undergoing rehabilitation for his arm. But seeing him here, in person, made everything come rushing back. His right arm was in a specialized brace, not a cast. Those had come off months ago, but a support device that suggested the injury had left permanent damage. His face had aged in 6 months, new lines around his eyes and mouth that spoke to pain and regret. Ms. Rodriguez, Whitmore said. Staff Sergeant, Mr. Hendrix, requested this meeting. I'll leave you two to talk. She left. Sarah started to follow, but Elena caught her arm. Stay, please. Sarah nodded and took a position by the door. Marcus stood slowly, favoring his right side. Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for agreeing to see me. I didn't know I was agreeing to anything. But I'm here now. What do you want, Marcus? The use of his first name seemed to hurt him more than any physical injury could have. I wanted to apologize. In person, not over the phone. Not through lawyers or official statements. Face to face, the way a man should apologize when he's been as wrong as I was. You apologized already, on the phone. That was me accepting consequences. This is different. This is me acknowledging what I did to you, what I tried to do to you, and what I cost both of us." He gestured to his arm. The surgeons did their best. 3 operations, months of physical therapy. I've regained about 60% function, enough to live a normal civilian life. Not enough to ever serve again. Not enough to do half the things I used to do without thinking about them. Elena felt the familiar tightness in her chest. "I didn't want to hurt you that badly. The technique was perfect. I watched that video maybe 100 times. Showed it to my physical therapist, my surgeon, my lawyer, my family. Every single one of them said the same thing. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. And I did exactly what I shouldn't have done. You controlled my arm, gave me every opportunity to submit. And I kept pushing because I couldn't accept being beaten by someone I'd convinced myself was inferior." Sarah spoke up quietly from her position by the door. "Mr. Hendricks, why are you really here? Apologies are meaningful, but they don't require face-to-face meetings 6 months after the fact." Marcus turned to look at her, then back to Elena. "Because I want to ask if there's any way I can help with what you're building here. I know I don't deserve to be part of it. I know I'm probably the last person you want anywhere near your program. But Ms. Rodriguez, I spent 15 years in the Army teaching combat techniques the wrong way, teaching people that size and strength were what mattered, teaching the exact attitudes that got your partner killed and nearly got you killed and definitely got me discharged." He took a shaky breath. "I can't undo that. Can't take back 15 years of bad instruction. But maybe I can help fix it going forward. Maybe I can be the example, the cautionary tale of what happens when ego and prejudice override training and discipline. Maybe I can stand in front of new instructors and say, 'I'm the guy from the video. I'm the one who attacked a woman half my size because I couldn't handle that she was better than me. And I'm the one paying the price for that stupidity every single day of my life.'" Elena stared at him, trying to process what he was asking. "You want to work for me? After everything?" "I want to help fix what I helped break. I want to make sure no other soldier makes the mistakes I made. I want..." His voice cracked. "I want to honor the career I destroyed by helping make sure other people's careers aren't destroyed by the same toxic attitudes I carried." Sarah caught Elena's eye, her expression neutral but attentive. The decision was Elena's alone. Elena walked to the window, looking out at the training grounds where 298 soldiers had witnessed 7 seconds that changed military culture. Where her life had fractured and reformed into something she was still learning to recognize. You understand that if you do this, you'll be facing those attitudes every single day. You'll be the example of what not to do, the warning about letting prejudice override professionalism. You'll hear jokes, comments, whispers about the guy who got his arm broken by a girl. You'll be a living reminder of failure. "I'm already all of those things," Marcus said quietly. "At least this way, maybe the failure means something. Maybe it helps someone else avoid making the same mistakes." Elena turned to face him. "No special treatment. You work twice as hard as anyone else because you're starting from a position of having nearly destroyed everything we're trying to build. You face every criticism with humility and professionalism. And Marcus, the very first time you show any sign of the attitudes that got us here, you're gone. Permanently. No second chances." "Understood, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am. I'm not in the military anymore. Neither are you." "We're civilians trying to fix a system that failed both of us." She extended her hand. "You start Monday. Sarah will have the paperwork ready." Marcus shook her hand with his left, his right arm hanging at his side in its brace. "Thank you. You didn't have to give me this chance."
No, I didn't. But David Chen believed in second chances, believed people could learn and grow and become better than their worst moments. So I'm choosing to believe that too. Don't make me regret it. He left. Sarah waited until the door closed before speaking. That was either incredibly wise or incredibly stupid, and I honestly can't tell which. Neither can I, Elena admitted. But Sarah, we can't change military culture by only working with people who already agree with us. We need the people who got it wrong to help teach others why it was wrong. Your program, your decision. But Elena, I'm going to be watching him closely. So am I. The next 18 months transformed everything. The Integrated Combat Systems program expanded from 1 training facility to 6. Over 3,000 instructors were certified, going back to their units and teaching the principles Elena had nearly paid for with her career. The emphasis shifted from physical dominance to technical proficiency, from size and strength to skill and strategy. And Marcus Hendricks became the program's most effective advocate in the most unexpected way. He stood in front of class after class, showing his damaged arm, telling his story without excuses or justification. He showed the video of the incident, walked them through every moment where his prejudice had overridden his judgment, and made them understand the real cost of those attitudes. I was a ranger, he'd tell new instructor classes. 15 years in service, combat deployments, decorations, everything that was supposed to prove I was a real warrior, and I threw it all away because I couldn't handle that a woman half my size was better at combat instruction than I was. Not because she was lucky, not because I held back, but because she was better, more skilled, more technical, more professional. And instead of learning from her, I attacked her. That's not warrior mentality. That's cowardice dressed up as masculinity. The classes listened, some skeptically at first, but always ending with respect. Marcus's willingness to be vulnerable, to acknowledge his failures, gave him credibility that no perfect instructor could match. Elena watched him work and saw genuine transformation. The arrogance was gone. The need to dominate was gone. What remained was someone who'd learned the hardest lesson of his life and was determined to make sure others learned it more gently. 2 years after the incident, Elena received a letter that made her hands shake. It was from the Commandant of the Marine Corps, written on official letterhead, but in handwriting that suggested personal investment rather than bureaucratic distance. Ms. Rodriguez, the investigation into the Helmand Province incident involving Staff Sergeant David Chen has been reopened based on new evidence and testimony. The original after-action report has been found to contain significant omissions and factual inaccuracies designed to protect certain officers' careers at the expense of truth. Based on the reinvestigation, the following actions are being taken. 1. Staff Sergeant David Chen is being posthumously awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat. His tactical assessment, which was ignored, has been determined to have been accurate and could have prevented the ambush that resulted in his death and the wounding of 2 other Marines. 2. The field-grade officer who made the decision to override Staff Sergeant Chen's assessment is being reprimanded and will face a board of inquiry regarding his conduct. 3. Your assessment and recommendations from that operation are being entered into the official record, along with a formal acknowledgement that your warnings were ignored due to gender bias rather than tactical considerations. 4. You are being offered reinstatement to the Marine Corps at the rank of gunnery sergeant, with full back pay and benefits if you choose to return to service. Staff Sergeant Chen's family has been notified of these actions. His sister, Captain Sarah Chen, JAG Corps, was instrumental in pushing for the reinvestigation. On a personal note, Ms. Rodriguez, the Marine Corps failed you. We failed Staff Sergeant Chen. we allowed prejudice to override professionalism, and good Marines died as a result. What you've built with the Integrated Combat Systems program is exactly the kind of cultural change we need.
I hope you'll consider bringing that expertise back to the Corps. Semper Fi, General Marcus Kellogg, Commandant, United States Marine Corps.
Elena read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. David's Navy Cross. Official acknowledgement of what had really happened. Justice, delayed, but finally arriving. She called Sarah immediately. "You did this. You pushed for the reinvestigation." Sarah's voice was thick with emotion. "We both did. You gave testimony. You provided documentation. You refused to let them bury the truth. Elena, my brother died a hero. Now everyone knows it. Now it's in the record. Now his name means what it should have meant all along. The Commandant offered me reinstatement. I know. Are you going to take it?" Elena looked around her office. Pictures on the wall showed graduating classes of instructors from every branch of service.
Letters from soldiers who said the program had changed how they understood combat, how they trained their teams, how they viewed their fellow service members, regardless of size or gender. Marcus's latest evaluation report showing exceptional performance and genuine humility.
"No," she said finally. "I can honor David's memory better by continuing what we've built here. The Marines will implement our program like every other service branch. That's how I serve now. That's how I make sure what happened to him never happens to anyone else."
He'd be proud of you. Hell, I'm proud of you.
3 years after that day in the training facility, Elena stood once again in front of 298 soldiers. But this time it was a ceremony, not a demonstration. The training facility had been permanently designated as the National Combat Systems Training Center, and she was being presented with the Department of Defense Medal for Distinguished Public Service, the highest award the military could give a civilian. General Whitmore read the citation. "For extraordinary contributions to military combat training, for courage in the face of personal and professional adversity, and for fundamentally transforming how the United States Armed Forces approach close-quarters combat instruction, resulting in measurably increased combat effectiveness and force survivability." The applause was thunderous, but Elena's eyes found the faces in the crowd that mattered most. Sarah Chen, now a major, standing with her parents, David's parents, who were crying and smiling at the same time. Marcus Hendricks, his right arm still in its brace, but his face showing pride rather than resentment. In Corporal Walsh, Senior Chief Morrison, and dozens of other soldiers from that original demonstration, many of them now instructors in the program themselves. And in the front row, Colonel Morrison, now Brigadier General Morrison, who'd taken a chance on hiring a controversial contractor and had backed her when everything fell apart. Elena stepped to the microphone for her acceptance speech. She'd prepared remarks, professional, appropriate, safe. She set them aside. 3 years ago, I broke a man's arm in front of 298 soldiers. Some of you were there. You watched it happen. You recorded it on your phones despite regulations. You made it go viral. You turned 7 seconds into a national debate about women in combat, about appropriate force, about what it means to be an effective warrior. The silence was absolute. I didn't want to be famous for breaking someone's arm. I wanted to be known for being good at my job.
For teaching combat techniques that save lives, regardless of whether the person using them is 5'3" or 6'4", 140 pounds or 240 pounds, male or female. But you don't always get to choose how you become known. You only get to choose what you do with the platform you're given. She looked at Marcus, who was watching her with complete attention.
Staff Sergeant Hendricks attacked me that day because he couldn't accept that his assumptions about combat effectiveness were wrong. I defended myself, using techniques I'd practiced thousands of times. The injury was severe because he refused to submit, refused to acknowledge that being caught didn't make him weak. It made him human. And that refusal cost him his career, his health, and nearly cost me mine. Marcus's face was unreadable, but he didn't look away. But here's what that 7 seconds taught us. It taught us that prejudice has consequences, that ego can be more dangerous than any enemy, that technical skill matters more than physical attributes, that respect isn't given based on size or gender. It's earned through competence and professionalism. And it taught us that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought against external enemies, but against the toxic attitudes we carry within our own ranks. She held up the medal. This honor doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to David Chen, who died trying to prevent a disaster caused by someone's prejudice. It belongs to Marcus Hendricks, who had the courage to acknowledge his failures and work to prevent others from making the same mistakes. It belongs to every soldier who's been told they don't belong, who's been judged by their appearance rather than their capability, who's had to fight twice as hard for half the recognition. Her voice strengthened, carrying to every corner of the facility. We've trained over 8,000 instructors in 3 years. We've implemented standardized combat systems across all service branches. We've proven that when you teach technique over strength, when you emphasize skill over size, when you judge warriors by their effectiveness rather than their demographics, you create a more capable, more lethal, more professional military force. That's not political correctness. That's tactical reality. That's what wins wars and brings people home alive. She looked directly at the camera she knew was recording this for official purposes. To every young woman who watched that video and wondered if she belonged in the military, you do. To every person who's been told they're too small, too weak, too different to be effective in combat, you're not. And to every service member who still believes that physical dominance matters more than technical proficiency, watch the video again. Watch what happens when prejudice meets preparation. Watch what happens when ego meets expertise. And then ask yourself who you want next to you in combat. Someone who's bigger and stronger, or someone who's better trained and more skilled. The applause started slowly, then built until the facility was shaking with it. Elena stepped back from the microphone, the medal heavy in her hands, but her shoulders lighter than they'd been in years. After the ceremony, Marcus approached her slowly. "Thank you," he said simply, "for including me in that, for acknowledging that people can change, for giving me the chance to be part of the solution instead of just remaining the problem." "You earned it. Every day for 3 years, you've earned it." "My arm will never be the same. My career is over. I'll carry the consequences of that day for the rest of my life." "I know." "But Elena, I'm grateful it happened. Because I was heading down a path that would have hurt a lot more people than just you. The injury, the discharge, the public humiliation, all of it was necessary to break through the armor of arrogance and prejudice I'd built up over 15 years. You didn't just break my arm that day. You broke open the possibility that I could become someone better than I was." Elena felt tears threatening again. "David would have said the same thing. He believed everyone deserved the chance to learn and grow." "Then I'll keep working to deserve that chance, every single day." He walked away, and Sarah appeared at Elena's side. "How does it feel?" Sarah asked. 3 years later, 8,000 instructors trained. Military culture fundamentally changed. David's name cleared and honored. Your career transformed from contractor to director of the most important training program in the modern military. How does it feel? Elena thought about the question, about the journey from that training facility demonstration to this moment, about the price paid and the progress earned, about Marcus's destroyed arm and her own transformed purpose, about David's sacrifice finally being recognized for what it was. "It feels like the fight was worth it," she said finally. "Every second of it." Because that's what real warriors did. They fought not just against external enemies, but against the internal prejudices that weakened forces from within. They stood up when it was easier to stay silent. They defended themselves when attacked, regardless of the cost. They refused to accept that the way things had always been done was the way they should continue to be done. And they turned 7 seconds of confrontation into 3 years of transformation, proving that technical skill beats physical dominance, that preparation beats prejudice, and that one person willing to challenge the status quo could change an entire military culture. The training facility emptied slowly, soldiers filing out to return to their units carrying new knowledge and new perspectives. But Elena remained, standing in the exact spot where Marcus had attacked her and where she'd defended herself, and where everything had changed. Sarah stood beside her in comfortable silence until Elena spoke again. "David used to say that the best warriors aren't the ones who win every fight. They're the ones who make sure the fight was worth having." Sounds like him. This fight was worth having. All of it. The investigation, the media circus, the threats, the doubt, the struggle to build something new from the wreckage of what happened. It was all worth it because now thousands of soldiers are being trained better. Lives will be saved because technique is being valued over size. Careers won't be destroyed because people are being judged by their competence rather than their gender. She turned to face Sarah directly. "I didn't break Marcus's arm because I wanted to hurt him. I broke it because I refused to accept being hurt myself. I refused to accept that his prejudice gave him the right to assault me. I refused to be another woman who stayed silent, who took the abuse, who accepted that challenging men's assumptions was more dangerous than just conforming to them. And that refusal, that 7 seconds of absolute commitment to defending myself, that changed everything." Sarah smiled, and the resemblance to David was so strong that Elena's heart ached. "My brother would have been so damn proud of you. Not because you broke someone's arm, but because you broke the system that made breaking someone's arm necessary. Because you took the worst moment of your career and transformed it into the foundation of something that will save lives for generations." They walked out of the facility together, leaving behind the space that had witnessed both destruction and transformation, violence and justice, prejudice and progress. Behind them, on the wall of the newly renamed Rodriguez Combat Excellence Center, a plaque read, "On this site, May 15, 2019, combat instructor Elena Rodriguez demonstrated that technical proficiency, proper training, and professional courage matter more than physical size, gender, or traditional assumptions about combat effectiveness. Her example transformed military culture and proved that the strongest warriors are those who fight not with the bodies they're given, but with the skills they've earned." Below that, a second plaque in honor of Staff Sergeant David Chen, USMC, whose sacrifice and whose sister's determination had helped ensure that truth finally prevailed over prejudice. And in offices, training facilities, and combat zones around the world, soldiers were learning new techniques, challenging old assumptions, and understanding that respect isn't demanded, it's demonstrated. One defensive technique at a time, one broken barrier at a time, one transformed life at a time.
Because 7 seconds can break an arm, but the right 7 seconds can break down decades of prejudice and build something better in its place. And Elena Rodriguez had proven that sometimes the most important battles are fought not against enemies abroad, but against the toxic assumptions that weaken warriors from within, and that winning those battles requires the same courage, the same skill, and the same refusal to back down that defines every warrior worth the name.